The following program is made possible by the friends and partners of GodQuest Ministries.
How old is this planet anyway? From the CTN studio in Pensacola, Florida, this is the Creation Today show. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Hovind, and I'm joined by Paul Taylor.
And on today's show, we'll be talking with a very special guest, learning some of the interesting features of the Mount St. Helens eruption, and we'll be finding out a little bit about how life and vegetation could have reappeared after a worldwide flood.
It's going to be interesting. You've got questions, we've got answers. You can send them to questions@creationtoday.org or join us on Facebook at Creation Today. Remember, we believe the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate in every single detail. Welcome back to the Creation Today show. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Going to be talking about a lot of different things, including Mount St. Helens, which is, you don't hear a lot about this from the evolutionists, so we're going to hear why you don't hear a lot about this.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. We're going to be talking about a very exciting DVD project on Mount St. Helens.
Really good.
And there's a lot of very interesting things going on at the moment. In fact, very, very soon, within a very short space of time, you and I will both be traveling to Oregon. That's correct.
We're going to be at the Northwest Creation Conference.
Yes, and you can find out about that conference at creationnw.org. We're very excited about being there and joining in with a number of other speakers.
It's going to be nice, man.
It's going to be very exciting.
They got some guys from ICR there. I saw that, and we're going to be there. It's in Portland, Oregon, so if you can travel over to Portland, please come by. We'd love to see you there. Be a lot of fun. Excellent. Hey, we also got the Proof of God conference next October. 12, right? October 12th. 10, 12, 12. 10, 12, 12 is going to be the Proof of God conference in Orlando, Florida. We'd love to have you there. We got some great speakers. Paul is going to be there. Carl Kirby, our friend Carl Kirby from Reason for Hope is going to be there.
He is indeed. And Mark Spencer is going to be there from Living Waters.
That's going to be great. And Seitzen, Bergen, Kate, and myself, we're going to have a really good time at the Proof of God conference in Orlando, Florida. Hey, for those of you that are local here to the Pensacola area, we got some really cool news. We got our first, and I believe it's the only one in Pensacola, rideable dinosaur. I know it's the only one on W Street. I know that for sure.
I was just going to say it's the only one on W Street. It's the only one at 5800 W Street.
That's correct. A rideable dinosaur. You got to come by the Creation store and check out our ride-on dinosaur. Let the kids have a good time and learn a little bit about creation while they're there.
It is tame. And I do want to emphasize that it's probably, as far as we know, a herbivorous dinosaur.
We think.
Yeah, so we've not had any children eaten by it yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're waiting for that. Well, like I said, we got a great show for you today. We are joined with a gentleman from Compel Media. His name is Kyle Justice, and he's joining us by way of Skype. So, Kyle, thanks so much for being with us today.
Eric, it's great to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me.
You have been working on a project with Steve Austin, and just so our listeners know, that's not the $6 million man, and it's not the stone cold guy. This is a guy that has a brain for geology, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he's worked with Institute for Creation Research and done lots of studies specifically around the Mount St. Helens area. And I'm excited about learning what you've done with Steve and some of the things that you guys are pushing right now.
Yeah, but I think first of all, before we get into the substance of the DVD project that you've done with Steve, I think what our audience would really like to know is who you are really, Kyle. What's your involvement with these things? How did you come to be involved with this whole idea of a documentary on the subject of creationism?
Yeah, excuse me, it's quite an opportunity. What was interesting is you might say I was a child prodigy with video. My dad was his hobby was filmmaking, and I have a twin brother, and he and I both picked up on it, and really found I was very naturally talented. God gave me some gifts in that. And when I was in high school at a youth camp, there was a gentleman that came out, a guy named Dr. Donald Chittick. He's been traveling for years, inspired hundreds and thousands of people, and there was just something in me that burned as far as, wow, there's really scientific evidence for creation and the Bible, And at the time, I was doing a lot of video work, and I thought someday I want to do something that involves video and creation to help promote, this type of message, because it needs to be out there. Yeah. And back in, about 96, I was working for the Family Channel. Before that, I worked for Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, and God just gave me lots of opportunities. And when I was working for the Family Channel, I had a lot of gear, a lot of editing available to me. And around that same time, there was a show called Bill Nye the Science Guy. Yeah. And I thought, you know what? We need to produce something like that's more geared to creation. And so I created this concept called the Ex Nihilo Show.
Yes.
And developed this concept and wanted to do dinosaurs in the Bible. It was a real popular, subject with kids. But I needed a host, and so Carl Kirby, you mentioned. First I talked to Donald Chittick. He said, you need to talk to Carl Kirby. Yes. And then I talked to Carl Kirby, and he said, you need to talk to a guy named Kurt Stroiker at Answers in Genesis. And so I went to Answers in Genesis, met with Ken Ham, Mark Loy, and a few others, and we partnered together to produce this project, and it turned out really well. And then in 2000, I developed another project called the Creation Network that aired on Angel One, and it was a continuous 26-episode series of documentaries and seminars. My background is corporate work and broadcast work, people like National Geographic, ESPN, and so on. So God's given me lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
And in 2010, I produced a 30-minute documentary, about 45-minute documentary on the 30th anniversary of Mount St. Helens. Yeah. And really had a passion to produce something that presented the creationist side to Mount St. Helens. So I called Dr. Austin and I said, I'd like to feature you in a project. And he goes, I've been thinking about doing a documentary myself. And I said, well,
that works out nicely.
Yeah, I know. It's like, well, why don't we do it together? And so we started kind of crafting the whole message and what we wanted to do. And then in August of 2011, we went up on the monument, got the permits, and for 2 days we went into the monument, went on Spirit Lake, we went into the Little Grand Canyon area, and just shot a lot of video and created this documentary that we're talking about today. So Dr. Austin, he is an authority, on this whole subject, and it was so much fun to sit there. A guy at my church said, "Yeah, he's the rock star, of creationism."
Rock
and with
star, no pun intended, right?
That's right. I mean, he's an amazing fellow, and he's done such a lot of work over many, many years on the subject of Mount St. Helens. And clearly you've obviously known about that beforehand as well. So what made you think that was important? Why was the study of Mount St. Helens so important?
Well, two things. One is when Mount St. Helens went off and Dr. Austin was real involved and a couple other scientists, I'm not sure exactly who dubbed it the God's gift to creationists, but to creationists, that's what Mount St. Helens is known as.
It's huge.
And I don't know if you know this, but even in the secular world of scientists, it is the most studied volcanic place on Earth. There's huge amounts of research going on there. And part of it's because, very few times have scientists have had that opportunity to really study catastrophism or whatever that's one word that we use. Usually with uniformitarianism is what secular scientists believe in, that, little change over long periods of time. Here they have this living laboratory is what it's also called, of, this catastrophe, and they get to study, what happens when a catastrophe happens, and how fast does it grow? How slow does it grow back?
That is the beauty of this place, and I want to talk to you more about that. We need to take a break, but guys, coming up after the break, we're going to talk to Kyle a little bit more about the project that he's put together, and even show you some clips so you can get to know it a little bit better. We'll be back right after this.
you can see the effect of the pyroclastic flows. The coarse and the fine material is separated into thin layers called laminae. And the laminated appearance of the pyroclastic flow deposits is really interesting because it shows us that particles can be separated at high speed. These pyroclastic flows were moving at about 100 miles per hour. As the grains were being propelled over the surface in a slurry, the particles separated coarse and fine into thin layers. I had thought that a catastrophe would mix up all the particles and make a homogenized deposit. Boy, was I wrong. Right here, a pyroclastic flow moving at freeway speed or higher can separate particles into coarse and fine. So layering doesn't require millions of years, thousands of years, or even hundreds of years. It can form rapidly in this slurry flow process.
All right, now that was a great clip, but there's a lot of men in our audience that need to be told things twice. There's a lot of men in our audience that need to be told things twice. So let's cover again what that was talking about, because what he just said was absolutely huge. The layering of sediments doesn't necessarily take a long period of time. It can actually happen very quickly. That's amazing. So was this something you found interesting about Mount St. Helens, Kyle?
Definitely. I mean, I've been studying Mount St. Helens. I mean, it's in my backyard. I'm in Portland. I saw it. In fact, I saw it go off when I was 10 years old, you know, in May 18th, 1980. So, you know, it's stuck in everyone's mind who grew up here. And, but a lot of the detail, you know, I didn't know. And it was great to go up and to see that. You know, the thing is, like Dr. Austin said, you know, when he was going to university, so often over and over and over was this whole concept of, you know, that it took long periods of time to create layering and stratified layering and different kinds of layering. And, but, you know, I always seen pictures of it, but to actually go there and to have them point it out and to see that was really amazing. What was also fascinating was when he talked about how a lot of these layers were produced in pyroclastic flows.
Yes.
And, you know, to sit there and look up at the mountain and just kind of imagine it kind of coming towards you, and then to see that, and these are hurricane force winds, and I mean, you would not want to be in one of these flows. But, you know, what he described and what we saw there was this minute layering of thin layers with small particles, and then right above it was these layers that had, you know, these bigger chunks of pumice and so on, and then a thin layer again. And it's all happening very, very quickly through this whole area. It was really amazing. So, yeah, I learned a lot, and it was really cool to actually see it.
I didn't realize you've been there the whole time, so you actually got to see it go off. You got to, I mean, experience all of it. So that's really cool.
It's amazing. There is a famous photo, isn't there, Kyle, that Steve Austin took, and you use this in your documentary, where you could see his hand and you could see a number of layers of rock, and the idea is that you could just imagine that being in a classic geological textbook, with somebody saying, well, these layers must have taken several thousand years each to form. You got, you know, 1 million years or so of rock formation there, and yet, of course, as the DVD points out, that happened in the space of just a few hours.
Wow.
It did, and not only was it, you know, just not that much layer, but, you know, it was several tens of feet of layers that all happen within 8-9 hours, you know, total or less.
Man, so many scientists are studying that. If that's one of the most studied volcanoes, you're going, wow, why can't they see the truth here? Come on, guys, this stuff doesn't take millions of years, because we know the Grand Canyon, for example. They always talk about the millions of years of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny too, Eric, is that if you go to Johnston Ridge, they have a really nice movie that you watch. And what's interesting is at the beginning of the movie, they say, over long periods of time, you know, slow process has to happen, but every once in a while, something dramatic happens. You're kind of going, yeah, I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah,
you got to get it here.
Get it here. It's just like I saw something the other day with, they were talking about there being a flood up north of the Grand Canyon. Yeah, there was obviously a flood here, or a lake here at one time, and they talk about that, but they can't see Noah's flood. What's the matter with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing, but it goes back to, basically before the Renaissance, scientists believed in the Bible. They believed in creation, but, they wanted to get away from that, so they had to come up with something. And so since, Darwin and a little bit before that with Charles Lyell, this whole secular humanism, permeates our society. So everyone thinks in that. So to introduce this type of catastrophism and rapid formation of layers, it takes time. People, they have to get over their whole worldview of slow processes.
Wow.
Now, there's an interesting, I've read a lot in the past over many, many years about this mini Grand Canyon close to Mount St. Helens. Well, of course, what's special about your documentary is that you've got aerial photography of it going over it. You're actually in it, Steve's actually in it, and you can see the thing, and it's the next best thing, presumably, to actually being there. What are the implications of that canyon with its little tiny stream down in the bottom there for as a model for the Grand Canyon?
Well, yeah, the documentary is great because I have this one shot where I start on the stream and I tilt up to the mini Grand Canyon, and Dr. Austin, he says, how did this stream create this canyon? It didn't. And that's the thing is you look at that stream, and secular scientists who don't believe in catastrophic things, they have no other option, but to say it had to be this stream. And the great thing about Mount St. Helens is it shows us that no, there are other options, and it was catastrophic. And yet they still, and I'm sure you'll go into this at some other show, but a great example is the Missoula flood, where a secular scientist believed catastrophic process is responsible for all this geologic formations in eastern Washington, and yet he was shunned by the scientific community for 70, 80 years. Just because it didn't mesh with, long processes and little change. And Mount St. Helens shows us that it was catastrophic.
Wow.
Absolutely.
I love what Dr. Austin said in that clip. He said, look, this even surprised him, what actually happened here and the evidence that came from Mount St. Helens. It actually kind of shocked him because he said, hey, I was wrong about these layers. They can form rapidly.
Yes, and you said about the stream didn't form the canyon. The stream was formed by the canyon. Really,
yes, exactly. If it wasn't for that canyon, you wouldn't have the stream.
That's right.
Hey, one of the questions that we get asked on a regular basis, and I thought we'd hit this with you after the break, is what about the flood destroying the world? How would the world recover from that? Wouldn't that take a long period of time? But we're going to answer that question with Kyle Justice from Compel Media right after this break.
Join John Mackay, Director of Creation Research International, on a worldwide tour to discover geological evidence which supports the biblical account of Earth's history and contradicts Darwin's belief that the rock formations took vast amounts of time to be laid down.
The average person sees millions of years. You look at the textbooks and it says these rocks were laid down between 65 and 67 million years ago. Now I've got some old friends, but none of them are as old as that. But I tell you what you can do if you want to run a test. Some of you have struggled as to whether you could believe the world was created in just 6 days because of the evidence of the millions of years. Well, let's just run a check on how much time actually is preserved in those rocks and whether all the dead things, the fossils, really do show life has evolved.
This fast-moving and information-packed presentation is especially enjoyable with John Mackay's Outback Australian style. To order this DVD, go to creationstore.org.
Welcome back to Creation Today. We've been enjoying our time with Kyle Justice from Compel Media, who's just done a documentary on Mount St. Helens, showing all this evidence that agrees 100% with God's Word with the idea of a global flood. So this has been real interesting. We do have one of your questions, though, that we thought we'd have Kyle help us answer.
Yes, we had an email in, Kyle. The question was, a worldwide flood would almost certainly have wiped out all vegetation for years to come. the survivors could never have lived long enough to see the food supply replenish itself. So, you know, that really fits very much with something that was said in your documentary. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, you know, it is amazing. When the volcano first went off, you know, the scientists went in there and they were awestruck of the destruction. And they made a lot of predictions that it would take, you know, hundreds of years. Now, you know, the documentary shows what it was like before, you know, these huge, you know, firs and just beautiful landscape, and it was gone totally.
Wow.
The other thing that was amazing that they studied was Spirit Lake, and it was a toxic wasteland. You know, it killed everything in there, and they thought it would take years and years and years for that to redevelop. But there's so much they didn't understand or know. Now, if you talk to them now, they'll go, well, we were just guessing, you know, we really didn't know. You know, but they made these predictions, and it's been amazing to see how God designed nature to come back. You know, you mentioned the lupin, and I interviewed for the 30th anniversary the scientists who studied those. And there's so much nitrogen in the soil, nothing big could grow. But these lupin come in and they start to work with the soil and they change it so that other trees can grow. And it was amazing, the little place that we shot that biological recovery with Dr. Austin. I think we even showed images of that whole area, and it was just,
it's lush. It's got lots of stuff there.
It was incredible. What was there after the blast? Nothing.
Oh, you mean right after the blast? Yeah.
Yeah, but now you go through there and there's evergreens starting to grow and so on. You know, it's interesting too, Eric, is that the Forest Service, when they established that monument, they said, you know what, we're not going to plant, we're not going to do anything here. We're going to let this grow back naturally to kind of see how long it takes.
It's an experiment.
Yeah. And even in the 30th anniversary documentary I was trying to press the scientists. So did it surprise you? You know, is it... And well, no, not really. You know, we know now that, and it's like, okay.
Typical, we knew it all along.
Yeah, exactly. But you compare that to the flood, you know, that did wipe everything out. It was totally new landscape, volcanic activity underneath the water, creating all the ash and, you know, all this tectonic activity. It was massive. And yet, you know, not too long after, the plants started to come back. I mean, Noah sending out, you know, dove and coming back with an olive branch and so on. I mean, it didn't take that long to do the recovery. And they were in the ark about a year, and, you know, things were starting to come back. And, you know, sure, it wasn't like it was before, but, you know, it didn't take eons of time for that recovery to come back. And we see that at Mount St. Helens.
I'm sure, like for Noah's flood, for example, I'm sure they went out and actually started planting some stuff. They didn't just sit around and say, okay, God, you know, when's this stuff going to grow? I'm sure they actually cultivated. And you can actually see, I know at when I was at Yellowstone National Park, when the fires went through in the 80s, I believe, you can actually see the areas that they left alone. They've already grown back, surprisingly. But then the areas that they actually cleaned up and recultivated, man, those, you'd never know there was a fire there 20 years ago. You know, or I guess 30 years ago now. You'd never know that happened. So when you start working with the land right away and cultivating it, no problem getting vegetation to grow. But even without that, it does come back quickly, doesn't it?
It really does. You know, there's some chemical processes in the soil that take place, like we were talking there at Mount St. Helens. There's a whole area outside of the monument that was still in the blast zone that was owned by Weyerhaeuser, and they went through and they planted, and there were some challenges at the beginning where there was too much ash, so they kind of had to dig into it and get it there. But you know, with the flood during Noah's time, it just wasn't ash. There was a lot of soil and sediments and so on. You know, so in my opinion, there was probably a little better soils, you know, for plant recovery to happen after the flood than just what we see at Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens was pretty dramatic as far as what the ground had there to work with for plants to grow back.
Nice.
The trees, though, in the blast zone that have been planted by Weyerhaeuser, I mean, they're 20, 30, 40 feet now, these seedlings that they put into the ground. And
well, let's show that. You got a clip of some of that, what happened with Steve Austin. Let's show that.
Look at the remarkable biological recovery that's occurred here. The blue plants, lupin, fixed nitrogen and made a soil. Quickly, the Indian paintbrush and the fireweed were back in, and then the alder groves have formed. And we even see here the seedling conifers back. So it won't take hundreds of years for this habitat to recover. It's already recovered in 30 years. Large parts of the blast zone were knocked down by the steam blast, and the soil there was churned up by pocket gopher that survived. And those pocket gophers single-handedly reseeded the blast zone. And animals invaded the landscape. The elk have taken advantage of this amazing habitat, and there are more elk per square mile here than there are in the forest. The remarkable recovery here at Mount St. Helens reminds me of what it must have been like after the global flood.
You know, that is the beauty of holding to the biblical worldview. It just makes sense. You just watched a clip from Mount St. Helens seeing Noah's flood through geology that Kyle Justice and his company have put together along with Dr. Stephen Austin.
Which
really
is
good stuff.
Absolutely amazing DVD. Kyle, do you want to tell us something about what's on that DVD?
Yeah, there's the main documentary, there's some deleted clips that just didn't make it into the main content, and some behind-the-scenes stuff, as well as a photo gallery. So really cool resources.
There's some great books out there as well. Steve Austin has done this one. It's not available at the Creation Store, but you can get it from ICR, the Institute for Creation Research, called Footprints in the Ash by Dr. Stephen Austin and John Morris. A really good one.
We can mention two other books by Dr. John Morris, The Young Earth and the Geology book.
He's done a lot. There's also The Case of the Missing Mountain to talk to your kids about Mount St. Helens. There's tons of evidence from Mount St. Helens to use to promote the biblical worldview. And then, of course, Dennis Peterson's book, Unlocking the Mysteries of Creation, another great resource if you want to check those out and study more.
And the DVD on Mount St. Helens you've seen clips on will be available on demand on Amazon.com as well. And
That's right.
It's been great talking to Kyle Justice during this program.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle, for joining us. If you want more information on the video, you can visit floodgeologyseries.com. Well, that is our show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Remember, we believe God's Word is absolutely true. We'll see you next week.
This program is available on DVD by visiting creationstore.org or by calling 877-479-3466. To order this episode, use the item number displayed on your screen.
Ten, 12, 12. 10, 12, 12 is going to be the Proof of God Conference in Orlando, Florida. We'd love to have you there. We got some great speakers. Paul is going to be there. Carl Kirby, our friend Carl Kirby from Reason for Hope is going to be there.
He is indeed. And Mark Spencer is going to be there from Living Waters.
That's going to be great. And Sighton Bergen, Kate, and myself, we're going to have a really good time at the Proof of God Conference in Orlando, Florida. Hey, for those of you that are local here to the Pensacola area, we got some really cool news. We got our first, and I believe it's the only one in Pensacola, rideable dinosaur. I know it's the only one on W Street. I know that for sure.
I was just going to say it's the only one on W Street. It's the only one at 5800 W Street.
That's correct. Yeah. A rideable dinosaur. You got to come by the Creation Store and check out our ride-on dinosaur. Yeah. Let the kids have a good time.
The following program is made possible by the friends and partners of GodQuest Ministries.
How old is this planet anyway? From the CTN studio in Pensacola, Florida, this is the Creation Today show. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Hovind, and I'm joined by Paul Taylor.
And on today's show, we'll be talking with a very special guest, learning some of the interesting features of the Mount St. Helens eruption, and we'll be finding out a little bit about how life and vegetation could have reappeared after a worldwide flood.
It's going to be interesting. You've got questions, we've got answers. You can send them to questions@creationtoday.org or join us on Facebook at Creation Today. Remember, we believe the Bible is
on Mount St. Helens.
Really good.
And there's a lot of very interesting things going on at the moment. In fact, very, very soon, within a very short space of time, you and I will both be traveling to Oregon.
That's correct. We're going to be at the Northwest Creation Conference.
Yes, and you can find out about that conference at creationnw.org. We're very excited about being there and joining in with a number of other speakers.
It's going to be nice, man.
It's going to be very exciting.
They got some guys from ICR there. I saw that, and we're going to be there. It's in Portland, Oregon, so if you can travel over to Portland, please come by. We'd love to see you there. Be a lot of fun.
Excellent.
Hey, we also got the Proof of God conference next October. 12, right? October 12th.
20.
And learn a little bit about creation while they're there.
It is tame. And I do want to emphasize that it's probably, as far as we know, a herbivorous dinosaur.
We think.
Yeah, so we've not had any children eaten by it yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're waiting for that. Well, like I said, we got a great show for you today. We are joined with a gentleman from Compel Media. His name is Kyle Justice, and he's joining us by way of Skype. So, Kyle, thanks so much for being with us today.
Eric, it's great to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me.
You have been working on a project with Steve Austin, and just so our listeners know, that's not the $6 million man, and it's not the stone cold guy. This is a guy that has a brain for geology, literally true and scientifically accurate in every single detail. Welcome back to the Creation Today show. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Going to be talking about a lot of different things, including Mount St. Helens, which is, you don't hear a lot about this from the evolutionists, so we're going to hear why you don't hear a lot about this.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. We're going to be talking about a very exciting DVD project